Hey there, Alex here. I recently picked up a Redmi Note 4X, which is one of Xiaomi's newer big screen budget devices. At just around $150 US, it's packing some surprisingly decent hardware for its price tag. But decent hardware doesn't always translate into good user experience. So is the Redmi Note 4X any good? Let's find out. The design of the phone is pretty generic, but definitely feels better than the price tag suggests. The back is mostly metal, with the top and bottom portion being plastic. Overall, it's a pretty decent looking phone. It even has a fingerprint sensor that is actually quite fast at unlocking the phone, something I did not expect from a phone at this price. There is a single firing speaker at the bottom, which isn't the clearest I've heard, but does get pretty loud, so media consumption is actually still quite enjoyable on this device. At the top, there's a headphone jack with an IR blaster. The phone has a 5.5-inch Full HD LCD display at the front, which looks decent for the most part, except under direct sunlight. It's also packing a Snapdragon 625 chipset with 3GB of RAM and 32GB of internal memory, which is actually pretty surprising considering its price. The processor is able to handle most day-to-day tasks with ease and feels pretty responsive. Gaming experience is also pretty decent too for most games. Like a lot of Xiaomi devices, I can choose to use 2 SIM cards on the phone or use a micro SD card instead. But the more interesting part is actually the 4100 mAh battery, which makes it a beast when it comes to battery performance when you combine it with a very efficient Snapdragon 625 chipset. The phone lasts me 2 days of usage most of the time with an insane amount of screen on time, and this is with a lot of media consumption and gaming on it. A few minor downsides would be the lack of any form of fast charging and the use of a micro USB port instead of a Type-C port, but not exactly deal breakers for a phone at this price range. Camera performance wise, the 13-megapixel rear camera is really not that great, and daylight is able to capture decent looking images for the most part. But the poorer dynamic range means that I'm better off leaving HDR mode on most of the time, since there is no auto HDR mode. Low light performance wise, let's just say it's not something that I will use very often on this phone. The same goes for the 5-megapixel front camera, which is pretty mediocre in anything but the best lighting conditions. The phone runs a customized version of Android called MIUI, which is one of the most feature-packed Android experience around. For example, I can change the theme, change the way the capacitive buttons work, customize the status bar, use it in a simplified mode, set up a child mode, create a second space for perhaps a work profile or temporary use, duplicate apps so that I can run 2 different accounts, lock apps behind a password, use a gesture to take a screenshot, double tap to wake the phone, or add a shortcut button to lock the phone. And that's just part of what I can do with MIUI. The good thing is, the responsiveness of the interface is still decent despite all these features. But on the downside, there are a few things that I really don't like about MIUI. Like how some of the default apps require permissions that they shouldn't need, or how I can't disable some of the built-in apps. It's all just a little bit too much for my personal preference since I prefer more of a stock Android experience. This approach to Android might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I can definitely see some folks would find some of these features useful. The phone is still running Android 6.0, but the software is so heavily customized that I really don't think it matters much that it's not running the latest version of Android. In the end, I have to say, this is a really decent smartphone for its price. I find myself constantly being surprised by how much the phone offers for such a low price, especially when it's packing the very capable Snapdragon 625 chipset. If you're not too concerned about camera quality, the lack of an NFC chip, and the weird permissions requirements for MIUI, the Redmi Note 4X is a really good budget device to get. Also, the Redmi Note 4 actually just came out in Singapore about 2 days back, which is essentially the same phone, but just with local warranty at 259 Singapore dollars. So this review kind of applies to that phone as well. Do let me know what you think about the phone too in the comments below. Would you buy one? I would love to hear from you guys. Thanks for watching this video. If you like it, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks, and see you guys on the next one.